Hello, I'm BP Water, psychological thriller writer and author of Hold Your Breath and A Version of the Truth. And we went live a minute ago and we got cut off for some reason, so this is our second try. Hopefully we won't get cut off this time. And today I'll be joined by my fellow psychological thriller writer C.L. Taylor, who I will introduce in a sec. And here we go. I think Galley's here. Hello.
Hello, I can see you, but I can't see myself.
Oh, it should be split screened. Can you see yourself at the bottom of the screen?
Oh, no, I won't do that. No, I can't, but it's fine. It's probably better if I don't
It's
see myself.
it's fine. At least I can see that, both of us are here. So although I'm just
Cool.
going to tilt the camera so we can hopefully, there we go. So we've got more proper. There we go. Yeah, right. So lovely to see you on this wonderful thriller themed Instagram live that we're doing.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's lots of fun. So I was just telling Alvius before we joined a little bit about my latest thriller, Hold Your Breath, which came out in April, but is set around Halloween in October in a dark, creepy forest. So it's kind of perfect for this time of year. And your book also came out in the spring, in the midst of lockdown, just like mine, but it's now coming out in paperback this autumn, Strangers. So if you want to give us an idea of what Strangers is about.
Sure, yeah. So this is Strangers, and it came out on the 1st of October in paperback. It's about three lonely people, a shop manager, a security guard, and a kleptomaniac whose lives are brought together when they get involved in a crime in a shopping centre. There's a number of different mysteries in the book. One of the characters, Gareth, the security guard, he lives with his mum who's got Alzheimer's, and his mum starts receiving postcards from her husband, which sounds normal, but he disappeared 20 years ago. Then there's Ursula, the 6'3" kleptomaniac who's a courier. She moves in with the new landlord and discovers there's a locked basement that she's very suspicious of. And then finally we have Alice, who is divorced with a 21-year-old daughter. She's just started internet dating again. And after her first date, she starts being stalked. So all the characters have a mystery in their lives, and then they all come together when this crime happens in a shopping centre.
It's brilliant. I absolutely loved it. I read it first and then I listened to it on audio, because I sometimes find you get a different, get a different experience with audio, because with different narrators and things like that. And I absolutely loved it, and also loved your book last year, Sleep, which was very different to Strangers, of course, but
Yeah.
it's that's another great one, I think, for autumn, in that kind of people trapped together in a room sort of scenario.
Yes.
Although talking about Sleep, that book was slightly different to your previous thrillers before, wasn't it? And we were going to talk a little bit about shifting genre, or slightly pivoting a little about the type of books that we write. Why was it that you thought about going slightly towards the kind of mystery and guest house sort of angle with Sleep?
I think it's because I did so many of the psychological thriller tropes in my earlier books. So, I had toxic friendships in The Lie. I had a horrible ex, gaslighting in The Accident. I had a missing child in The Missing. I had a sort of threatening stranger threaten somebody's child in The Escape. And then in The Fear, I had a woman who gets revenge on someone who groomed her when she was a teenager. And I just thought, I want to do something a bit different. And I've always loved Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, and any kind of book that is a locked room mystery. And the inspiration just came, and luckily my publisher was fine about me doing something a little bit different. I mean, there's still a psychological thriller edge to Sleep, because the main character is being stalked. And then with Strangers, again, I just thought I'm going to try something a bit different again. Because for me, the most important thing when writing a book is writing something that interests and excites me. Because I don't want to churn books out. I want to put my heart and soul into every single book, and in order to do that, I need to write something a bit different every time.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting actually, because with my debut version of The Truth, which I'll plug again, that one there, that's more of a traditional domestic noir, in the sense that a lot of it is told within a household in central London, and about how a marriage starts to implode when a wife discovers something on her husband's Dropbox account, and it very much had those domestic noir themes of relationships within families being a source of something sinister. And there's another part of it as well, which is set at Oxford University. But and the book after that I was writing was going to be more domestic noir, more kind of set within the home. And as a side project, I started writing a book which I didn't think in a million years my publishers at the time would go with at all, because it felt like a horror book. And I kind of did it as like a separate project to try and see if I could write something a bit different, and try and see if I felt comfortable writing in a slightly different genre. And I don't know whether it's because thrillers are just in my blood, really, or if I just love them so much to read. But as I was writing it, I realised it did still kind of fall within that psych thriller, that psych suspense genre. And that was the book that ended up as Hold Your Breath. But when I started writing it, I wasn't sure it would ever even see the light of day, because I worried that my editors would read it and just think, oh my God, what has he done? Why is he doing things like exorcisms and scary forests and things like that? And I wanted to write something that felt like it was just kind of knocking on the doors of another genre, like horror or supernatural. And it doesn't go full horror or supernatural. It stays within a thriller genre, but it felt very refreshing to write something a bit different. And I think it's important for both the reader and the person writing the book that you don't feel it's going stale. You feel you're constantly doing something new, I think.
Yeah, but you can't go too out there. If you go too out there, then all your readers are like, no, what have they done? What is this book? But I think that psychological thriller now has become quite a wide term, so it almost encompasses psychological thriller, psychological suspense, mystery, thriller, maybe a little bit of horror, and everybody who writes within that genre sort of goes into their own sphere. Some writers are very domestic noir, so it will always be within the home and families or husbands and wives or relatives or whatever it is. And then there's others that kind of sort of creep around a bit more on the edges. But I think as long as you write a compelling story, and Hold Your Breath, absolutely fantastic. I told you how much I loved that. Your sense of place was just fantastic. The house was so claustrophobic where the family are living, and then the woods, and then the little brook where the girl plays, and it was really good, and it absolutely does sit within psychological thriller, I think.
Oh, it's lovely of you to say. And the whole book was basically my love letter to autumn, which, I mean, you probably see from my little shelves behind me. I love autumn. I love Christmas probably a bit more, which is why there's mince pies in the book. Even though it's set in autumn, I have the family baking mince pies as a kind of a reference to the fact that Christmas is probably my one true love, but autumn is like the run up to Christmas. So I kind of celebrate that within it. And my debut was set at Christmas as well. But yeah, I was thinking actually we could talk a little bit about our respective journeys to publication, because this is something I get asked, and you probably get asked about the most as well, which is like, how do you get an agent, how do you get published, and what it's actually like once you are published. So you want to share a little bit about what your kind of journey was like and how you got to be sitting where you are like right now today?
Yeah, sure. So I started off writing short stories, actually. And it was my way of finding my voice as an author and finding what it was that I like to write and the subjects that I like to write on. And I wrote for women's magazines, but I also wrote for literary anthologies and journals and that sort of thing. And I loved it. But then eventually I did sit down and I wrote a novel, but it was actually a romantic comedy. And so I had no connections with the publishing industry. there seems to be a misconception sometimes that, you know, all all authors are like Oxbridge educated and they know somebody in publishing or they're very rich or whatever. I went to Northumbria University. I knew nobody in publishing. And I just bought the Writers and Artists Yearbook and looked through for agents who at the time represented romantic comedy authors. And I looked through to see who were the most successful authors on their books. And I approached the first 6 that I found that I liked the look of. And at the time you had to write them a covering letter, 3 chapters and a synopsis and send it in the post. These days it's all done by email. And then I had interest from one agent, but he needed a lot of work on the book before he would take me on, which I did. And I sent it back. And then it turned out that his head of foreign rights, Madeline Milburn, read it and loved the book so much she wanted to represent me. So she is still my agent to this day, and she's got her own agency now, has done for some time. And so I wrote 2 romantic comedies that were published by Orion. And then sadly, after the second one, we approached my editor with an idea for a 3rd book, and she said she wasn't interested in commissioning any more romantic comedies. I think it was kind of the tail end of the whole Bridget Jones thing, and interested had fallen away a bit. So I was kind of left, and I thought, okay, that's it, that's the end of my career. And I happened to be pregnant at the time. And then when I had my son, I had an idea for a crime book, and I wrote the first chapter. I entered it into a competition and it won. And then I thought, well, I better write the rest. So I did over my maternity leave. And my agent found me Avon, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, and The Accident was published. And now I'm just doing the copy edits for book 8. So it all worked out in the end. How about you?
It does. Mine wasn't that dissimilar, really. At the time when I was going through it, it felt like the longest, most arduous, difficult, tedious journey possible. And then sometimes when I hear stories of others, I think it was actually fairly easy compared to some people's journeys. But yeah, at the time it felt really long and difficult. I started writing a book shortly after I finished my master's at uni and didn't really know what it was I wanted to do. And well, I did sort of. I knew I wanted to do something creative, but my MA was all to do with film promotion and film distribution and advertising and things like that, and was a lot more business and marketing oriented. And I thought about going into the film industry in terms of distribution, but I just knew that I needed to do something creative that was about me thinking up stories. And filmmaking itself kind of terrified me because it isn't just you. I think it's a lot of other people's time and money, and other things that impact the project. Whereas if you're writing a book, it is literally just you in a room writing a book, and you've only got yourself to answer for, really. And I had an idea for a novel, and because I was straight out of uni, my parents were really nice and said they didn't mind me just sitting at home for a year and writing a book. And I tried that, and I sent that book out. It probably took about 8 months, and I didn't get an agent on that novel. I got rejections, but they were saying nice things in the sense of like, we don't want this book, but do you come back if you write anything else, and that kind of thing. And so I wrote a second book, and I went back to one of the main agents who was really excited about the first, but decided not to go with it after all. And they had an exclusive on the second. And then the whole thing kind of flatlined, and I never heard anything again.
Oh.
And that was the first instance of where it literally seems like it's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen, which I realise is a bit of a pattern in this whole writing thing. And it's horrible, isn't it? Because after each moment, each request you get to say, I want to read the complete manuscript, or the next bit where an agent shows interest in the first 3 chapters and that kind of thing, you think, oh my god, it's actually going to happen, and then it doesn't, and you feel like you're back to square one. So yeah, after that flatlined, I then wrote a 3rd book, and I wrote that whilst as my work in progress for a creative writing course called the Faber Academy. Which is just amazing. And anyone who's watching this who thinks about going into creative writing but isn't quite sure where to go, if they need a nudge in the right direction, the Faber Academy is incredible. During these tricky times, I imagine it's probably all gone online, but I'm sure I'm sure their website's got details on that. But when I did it, it was in face to face, and it was with a group of other writers, and it was so nice being able to share your work in progress and read it out to everyone. And we had a brilliant tutor, the author Rowan Coleman, who who's just absolutely wonderful, and she was so encouraging, and it was probably the best thing I've ever done in terms of my writing, really. That really gave me like the homework to work on and the focus and everything like that. And that was the book that I ended up getting agency interest for, and my wonderful agent Joanna at Harman and Swainson. So it was that whole year, kind of, I think that was the year 2017. That's when it all kind of completely changed, and I've been trying at it for 2 or 3 years by that point. So it's by no means a quick situation, but I think the waiting for each different incremental step, waiting to see if the agents will take it, and months can go by, and then even when you've got an agent, there's no guarantee you're going to get a publisher. And I was very lucky that I did get a publisher on my first the first time it went round, but it was those 2 weeks when it went out on submission, and before Avon bought it, were the longest 2 weeks of my entire life. And during those 2 weeks, I actually, within my other role of doing social media with Waterstones, we're helping at a Facebook Live similar to this kind of situation between Claire McIntosh and Ruth Ware, who are 2 wonderful writers in the genre. And I was speaking to them, and they were very excited to hear I was out on submission. And Ruth Ware, I remember so clearly, said to me, but every step of this journey is waiting. She said, even once you've got the book out, you're then waiting for the edits, or you're waiting to hear if they actually like the book and want to accept the next one, and then waiting for the edits, waiting to see if any bookshops at all have bought it, and if so, how many and which ones. And it's like this one long journey of waiting. And that was brilliant advice to kind of prepare me for all of it, and in the sense that the whole job is inbox watching, really. It's waiting for the next email that tells you the next bit of information, really. So yeah, that was really good. But when it actually finally happened, I think the best moment was when my agent emailed me with the words, "You're going to be a published author," in big letters within it, because that's when you realise that it hasn't all kind of been for nothing, really.
Yeah, it's very magical, and it's still magical with every book that comes out. All the months and months of work that you put into it to finally hold it in your hands. There's nothing quite like it. But absolutely about persevering in this industry. You need to have a thick skin. You need a thin skin to write, but you need a thick skin to deal with the rejections and the criticism and the reviews and all the other bad stuff. And you just need to be determined and persevere. And the authors that make careers for themselves, often you may see a big name who's had this massive hit, but it turns out it's not actually their first book. It may not even be their real name. They may have had other books published before, but you've just got to keep going and keep going and keep trying. And the rejection doesn't end even when you're quite established. Some books will go down better with readers than others. Some sales will be better than others. You've just got to persevere, really.
Yeah, just keep going. I'm interested to hear how your process has changed over the years, and particularly with your switch from different genres and with the later books. Do you feel the way you approach each idea and how your writing has changed?
It does change with every book, and I've tried loads of different methods of writing and approaching a book. So the first one, which was my romantic comedy, Heaven Can Wait, I used the hero's journey, which actually I think was really useful as a structure to kind of plug my plot into it. And I think it made it much easier than it might have been to write that novel. And I've also used the 3-act structure. I read somewhere that James Patterson always does an outline before he writes his books, and he writes them really fast as a result of having an outline. I tried that, but my outline was 13,000 words long. So I felt like I'd written the book already, and then I had to write it for real. So I decided that outlines weren't for me. And then I did very detailed plotting using the 4-act structure, where I knew what would happen in most of the scenes. And again, that takes a bit of the magic out of writing for me. So what I do now, and what I've probably done for the last 3 or 4 books, is use the 4-act structure, know some of the scenes, but have lots of holes there as well, because it's only when you write that you really get to know your characters, and something you may have plotted for your characters to do might not feel right when you're actually writing them and you've got to know them. How about you?
I'm very similar, I think. When I wrote my first 2 books, didn't get anywhere. Although interestingly, I'm now rewriting both of them, and they are going to see a bookshelf. But they were stuck in hard drive for a long time. But neither of those were really written with any kind of plan in mind, and I just literally wrote as was, just from my head. And I felt very lost at a lot of points, and it's almost as if you're trying to follow a map in another language. And I needed to create my own map before I start, so I know where I'm going. And I feel a lot better now. I write my books with a very detailed plan. The very first thing I do is and I think you do something similar. I cast my characters with different. I get pictures of actors from films and things like that, and imagine just how they would look if it was, say, a movie, or even if they're not actors, just well-known people, just so I've got something tangible in my head. So when I'm giving the characters different names, or moving them around, or working out how they interrelate and things like that, at least then I've got something visual to work with. And I write like a casting book where I've got every single main speaking role laid out in it. And once I've done that with all their little kind of bios and things, that's when I then move on to the plot. And I've usually had the idea for the plot, I wouldn't really know what characters to populate it with, but that's when I really start laying out the proper detail of it. And I do normally write an outline. I either go straight into writing a chapter by chapter outline, or if I'm not too sure about the plot, I will just write free and just write an outline. And it's normally about 6,000 to 7,000 words. And although I could easily write a 13,000 word one, and by that point, if then it isn't chapter broken up, I then go back and work out where the chapters will go where. So by the time I start writing the actual book, which is the fun bit really, I know what I'm going to be writing, and it's almost like that stuff is taken care of, and it will still all change. And when it goes off to the publishers and my editors and things like that, they'll come back with suggestions and things will get rearranged. But I find that helps me along the way for not feeling too kind of all at sea at many different points. And I find it really helpful. I send the outline of each book to my agent first, and we talk it through, and that early feedback really helps, so I can kind of see which bit fits where and that kind of thing. And just this week I've sent my book 7 outline to my agent, and we've been talking about it this week. And that's the first stage of each book that I find it's really happening now, that it's actually gone from being just an idea in my head now to actually something proper on the page. So I find each bit quite exciting.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I do, and in fact today I just heard back from my agent, because I had a couple of ideas for book, gosh, I guess it'll be book 9, which comes out in 2020, which I need to start writing at the beginning of next year, but I need to start plotting at the end of this year. And I had 2 ideas, and I sent them to my agent, and she replied today, and she liked them both. And it was such a relief, and you've been sort of cogitating over an idea for a while, and it started to feel quite real. But now I've got the tricky task of deciding which one. But she gave me feedback. She said one idea was a bit morbid, and one idea had and one idea had more international appeal. So I thought, well, I'll probably go for the one with more international appeal. So that's exciting. I mean, I don't brainstorm ideas with her, and I haven't done for a long time. I'll literally just give her a few sentences, and she said to me, "Is there any more?" And I was like, "No, it's literally just those 3 sentences that I've sent you." And then I'll just get on with it. But often she'll give me feedback when I deliver it to my editor. She might also give me a few comments, or and I know I could go to her if I got stuck. But I often go to her for advice. Like, am I straying too far away from domestic noir? Is it sort of safe for my career to go in this direction or that? Or what's the international market like? What kind of books, are they after? That sort of thing. So I take a lot of direction from her, but when it comes to actually writing the books, I just write them and hope they're going to be all right.
Yeah, it's all you can do really in the end. After all those little bits are done, it is just literally you sitting and writing it all out. And my absolute main fear is getting to the end and feeling like I just want to click delete, and that hasn't happened yet. But I have spoken to some authors who've written a whole book and then have just deleted the whole thing afterwards. And if there's any horror story that really traumatizes me, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. I definitely have, plenty of moments of doubt when I write a book. And I think no book is ever going to be as good as that initial idea. You get so excited about that initial idea and think, this is going to be the best book I've ever written. And then maybe for the first 7,000 words, it is the best book you've ever written. And then you'll get to sort of 20,000 words or 40,000 or 60,000, and the doubts set in, and it's not as good as you imagined, and you feel disappointed in yourself. And, and you finish it thinking, but that love comes back. It's because you're so close to it, I think, and because no book is ever going to match that initial idea. But the love comes and goes. Some books I've written and thought, this is my best book that I've ever written, and then the sales don't reflect that at all. Other times I'll think, oh, this book was a nightmare, and then it sells really well. So it's hard to trust my gut instinct. I think I tend to know when I finish a book if I'm going to get heavy edits or not. That I can judge by my gut. But whether it will sell well or not is anybody's idea.
It reminds me so much of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which isn't my favourite Harry Potter film, but is regarded by many as one that's quite a standout, directed by Alfonso Cuarón. And I believe I was watching a talk with David Heyman on the creation of the Harry Potter films. And he says it's interesting how a lot of Potter fans regard that as their favourite, but it's one that made the least amount of money and was the least successful in all of the Potter films. And I'll probably have to fact check that, but I found that really fascinating to think the one that they felt they got the most purest in terms of story, in terms of it being true to the spirit of the book and that kind of stuff, didn't hit as high as the creators felt it was going to, or the fans felt it was going to. And I think things like that haunt me. I think when I'm writing, whenever I feel this is going really well, or I feel I've got an idea that people would leap at, I then just have this image of loads of blank faces going, that would just never work. And which is also my absolute fear whenever I send off my outline to my agent, or the first like part of the manuscript to my editor and that kind of stuff. I just have visions of them sitting and crying at their desks thinking like he's just gone loopy really. So thankfully it hasn't happened yet.
No.
But, I was going to ask actually, with the editing process, once the book has been kind of accepted and you're working on it, I know there's lots of different, and I've got kind of mixed views on it, but how do you find the editing process? Do you actually enjoy the whole process, or do you dread?
Well, if my editor Phoebe is watching now, she knows that I hate the editing process, and it's really nothing personal to her. She's a great editor, as is my other editor, Helen. I just find it really frustrating, I think, because the edits come back quite quickly, and writing a book is so intense. And particularly like this year, writing my next book, Her Last Holiday, I had a bit of like lockdown fog brain, and I struggled to write, and I delivered 2 months late, and it took me 6 months instead of 4 months. And after that sort of hard work, sustained work, what I really need is like a maybe 6 weeks break or 2 months break, just to time. But unfortunately in the publishing industry, when things do work quickly, they work very quickly. So I think I got something like a week, 10 days, and then my edits came back. And by that point, I was still too close to the book, too sort of locked into it in my head. And then to have to work on it again just feels a bit torturous to me. But luckily, the edits this time were pretty light. The ones where you have to do a lot of structural work and you're told, this subplot doesn't work and you need to get rid of that character and you need to change the ending or feed in something at the beginning, then it becomes like unpicking a ball of wool, you know, trying to pull the strands out and knit it into another jumper, or you've got a jumper, there's a hole here, and then you've got to pull it all the way back up. And I don't enjoy edits at all. Do you? Some authors do.
I feel so bad because Phoebe was also my editor on book one and then partly of book two. So Phoebe, if you're watching, none of this is personal. I don't hate edits. I fear them before they've arrived, and then when they've arrived, they're normally not as bad as I've worried about. I think it's because, like you say, it's as if you've gone on a very long journey filled with moments of near-death experiences and things like that. And then you've just reached the top of Mount Everest, or actually you've come back down again, you've reached your safe home, and you're all cozy and quiet in your safe home after the traumatic experience. And then someone says, now let's relive it all and do it again. And it can slightly feel that. And it depends on how much changes need to happen, because different books, of course, require different amount of edits. And there was... Hold Your Breath actually was going to be my third book, and it was swapped around to my second. And the book we were working before that will now be published at another date, was a very big book that required a lot of restructuring, a lot of edits to it. Whereas this one was so much easier to it, and there wasn't that much to do at all. And it was almost like, where's the catch? It felt almost, kind of. Like strange really how easy that one was in comparison. But I think all books have their own journey and their own kind of particular moments within that process that can feel a bit challenging. But yeah, it is like having to kind of relive all the bits that you've already anguished about, and then having to go back and confront their demons really. This also probably sounds terrible, but once the main structural edit has happened, which I usually find, terrifying and comforting in equal measure. Once that's kind of done, I don't want to say lose interest in the book, but I'm usually then so far into the writing of another book, or have written another book already, and I'm in the world of making up one after that. It can be very hard to drag your mind back into the line edit, which, if people don't know, the structural edit is when you do big changes to the book to do with plot and character. And then the line edit or copy edit is when you do quite smaller changes, and quite often can involve accepting different suggestions to do with sentence structure, or just minor tweaks and that kind of thing. And often by the time I get to that point, it's like trying to go back to an old job that you did, or going back to, somewhere you used to live. It feels very strange that you've got such a strong connection to that manuscript, but you haven't really been in that world for so long. I don't know if you find the same thing.
I did find that this year. I mean, normally I will put a book completely to bed before I even start on the next one, for that very same reason, that I need to hold it in my head. But because I've also written a young adult book recently, The Island, I found that earlier this year I was writing Her Last Holiday, the first draft, and then the copy edits, I think it was, or the line edits, came for The Island. So then I had to switch between writing in a world of adults to a world of teenagers that I'd actually written, a couple of years before. The book has sort of been kicking around for a while, and it was exactly what you said. It was so weird. It was like sort of being with your current partner and then going out on a date with somebody you went out with 10 years ago. You're a bit like, who are you? I sort of remember you, but I can't remember how we get on. So yeah, no, it is. And I also find it tricky to switch between writing and promotion. So if I'm asked to write an article or answer a Q&A or something like that, they're two very different parts of my brain that I find really hard to switch from one to the other.
Yeah, very much so. I find it particularly if what I'm writing is quite voicey, has a very distinctive voice. And I think Hold Your Breath is narrated predominantly by a 10-year-old girl. And the book my next book, my third book, is narrated in part by a 36-year-old man. So going between those two very different voices can be hard, because you just got to get yourself in that, in that part of your mind really to make that convincing. Sorry,
you did the voice of the 10-year-old girl so well. So
I'm
So the
so pleased to
question
hear
is,
that.
how though? How, as a, I'm guessing 20-something man, do you put yourself in the mind of a 10-year-old girl?
I actually have no idea. This is such I don't know, unsatisfactory answer, but I think I'm not too sure really. I think the voice of the character comes with the plot, and which I don't know whether it really makes sense, but I find it really interesting writing as characters whose lives are not like my own. Who
Mm.
have had very different experiences than my own. And it's quite a topical situation, really, a question at the moment, because there's all kinds of debates as to who has the right to tell what story and who shouldn't write a certain characters and that kind of thing. And a lot of that conversation alarms me a bit because as a creative person, and I was pleased to hear Bernardine Evaristo, who wrote the brilliant Booker-winning Girl, Woman, Other, so she doesn't really believe in this idea that people can't write people who are just so different to themselves, because otherwise you just have memoir, and for me it's
Mm.
fiction that really interests me. Otherwise I'd write a diary. And
Yeah.
I think getting yourself into the mind of someone else, I'm not an actor, but I imagine has a similarity to acting, where you have to put yourself in someone else's shoes and think, what would the choice they would make in that scenario, and if it's different to yours, how do you rationalize it, and things like
Mhm.
that. I think it makes that creative process a lot richer when you're writing, I think.
Yeah,
But then, yeah, sorry, what were you
yeah.
gonna say?
I think writing is so much like acting.
Mm.
I'd say when I write a character, I become that character. So, which sometimes can be a lot of fun if you've got a really witty, erudite character. That's fun. But then equally, when you're in a character who's fraught, or a character who's grieving, or a character who's, hurting in some kind of way, you have to sort of channel that into you to put it on the page, to make it feel real and make the reader feel as if it's real. And that's weirdly exhausting. Or is that just
Yes.
me?
No, I think it is weirdly exhausting, and I
Yeah.
find I am exhausted. I'm really tired once I've written even just for an hour and a half. I feel like in many times I've, like, not necessarily gone through the experiences of the characters on the page, because I'm not quite sure I'd still be, a
Yeah.
coherent person after that. But I find at least that I've gone on some kind of emotional journey, and it can be tricky if you've just spent half an hour writing a difficult scene. It can feel like you've done a day's work and you have to have a bit of a break, and that kind of thing. But it's because you've used your energy so
Yeah.
much. Although I find I'm constantly trying to, I don't know, reassure myself I have worked, even when I've had to like look up several things to fit in the book, or have tried to, like, tweak different bits. And if the words aren't there, if I can't see substantially and quantifiably that I've done, that amount of work, I find for the rest of the day I feel guilty that I've somehow kind of not
Yeah.
not done it, or something like that.
Yeah. Same. Some days I have to just think. And, to an outsider, it looks like I'm just lying on the bed, or it looks like I'm reading a book, or it looks like I'm watching a program. But a big part of writing is thinking. And
Yeah, yeah, it
you,
is.
you can't plow on if your head isn't in the right place, if you don't know what's coming in the scene, or what impact this new character is going to have on the plot. You need to get that clear in your head as well. But that's my excuse anyway. When my partner comes home and he says, "What have you done all day?" and I say, "I've just sat on the sofa."
So one of the most liberating things for me was when I was listening to an interview with the author Sarah Pinborough, who wrote Behind Her Eyes, which is a really clever book. If people haven't read that, it's one of those books where the least you know about it, the better. But she was talking in an interview about writing advice, and she kind of debunked the myth that a writer has to write every day. And she said she used to believe that, but you just don't. You don't have to write every day, and some days don't. It isn't possible.
Yeah.
And once I heard that, because you hear so often with writing advice and things that you should write a bit every day, make sure you've worked on it every day and things like that. And I totally get, if that is the the process that works for a particular person,
Yeah.
I can completely understand that. But
Mm.
I think I held that up as gospel for a long time before I
Yeah.
realised that it's actually more than okay not to write every day.
Yeah.
And once I realized that some days it's fine just to go, walking for an hour, listening to another book and thinking about, how you might develop yours, or even putting it down for a few days and not working on it, or working on something else as well. And I usually write 2 books at once at the same time, but they have to be at different points. So one has to be coming to the end, the other one is like just beginning or midway through. I can't have them both set out at the same time. Although I was talking to another author recently who thought that was absolutely bonkers. So
I don't know how you could possibly do that. I couldn't do that. I struggle to stop writing my novel to write a short story because I just need to stay in one world, sort of thing. But I just want to point out, in case there's any aspiring writers or authors watching, what Barnaby and I have been talking about plotting and outlining and all of that, is also perfectly fine to do none of that. If your process, if your process is just sit down and write, which is what I think Ian Rankin does, and several other authors, I think Mel Sherratt does that as well, loads of them, that works. Some authors, you know, will do that. They'll just pants, as it's called, writing by the seat of your pants, just sort of getting out there, making it up as you go along, and then they will do multiple drafts to make sense of the book. Other people like me, maybe, just does one draft. I plot and plan, and I work really slowly, and I write slowly, and it takes forever, but that's pretty much it at the end. With a few tweaks and a read through, that's what goes to my editor. But other people might write, you know, a really rough, messy 50,000 word draft in 2 weeks, and then rewrite it. And so whatever works for you, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, I don't think it's very much, it isn't one of those one size fits all things. And I think it's because it's a job that so many people would like to do or look upon and think, you know, it must be heaven every second. I think everyone is also looking for a hidden secret or a certain something that, you know, that you do, that kind of magic ticket. And there just isn't one. And I think just by, particularly when I was waiting for my first book to be published, because most people have to wait probably a year after signing the deal and actually getting the book on the shelf. It can quite often take a year, and which is an agonizing year. And I spent most of that time listening to interviews with authors, particularly newly published authors and things like that, and also, you know, big names, just hearing about their process and things like that. And that really drummed home to me how just there really isn't any particular way of doing it. And one of the particular quotes that stuck in my mind was Donna Tartt, who said the best way to write is to write as if you've got all the time in the world, and kind of lose the pressure off it. And of course, Donna Tartt writes one book every 10 years, so she really does write all the time in the world.
To write one a year, so that's a bit different. But what you were saying about, you know, sort of trying to look for that magic bullet, I still do that now. I've written 12 books over the entirety of my career, and I still will read the books that go massive, the books that everybody internationally is reading, that are selling millions, to look for that magic that has made that book so popular. And often I can't find it, and I don't know
where is it?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a combination of hype, or it's word of mouth, or it's marketing, or obviously there's something good about the book too, but there are obviously lots of really, really good books. So what is it about those one, you know, what is it about The Girl on the Train, or Eleanor Oliphant, or The Help, or, you know, any books that have been massive? And I can't put my finger on it, but, you know, I want to write one. I'm going to find out.
I felt that so much when I used to be a bookseller. I used to work in a bookshop, and quite a few. And I was lucky enough to be a bookseller back when there are a few of those phenomenon kind of releases. The 3 that I remember most vividly were Gone Girl and 50 Shades of Grey and The Girl on the Train. And it's quite exciting to be sort of in the trenches, so to speak, of the book trade when that's happening, because you get to meet so many excited readers who are desperate to read this book that everyone's talking about. And quite often there's someone who hasn't read a book in years, or even, you know, not in their adult life, but they've got to read this book because it's captured so many people's attention. And it's that kind of snowballing effect that's kind of mesmerizing to witness when it actually happens.
Yeah.
But like you, it's odd sometimes reading the books and thinking, and all three of those books, you know, are very well deserved in their attention. But it's odd to see the ones that it happens for, the ones that don't, the ones that capture the attention, the ones that have that magic spark. So I know completely what you mean about looking for that, you know, that golden secret within it.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask before we go into questions from people. I was going to ask what you've spoken briefly about what you're working on next, but can you give us any like details as to what projects you've got coming up?
Yeah, sure. So yes, paperback of Strangers out now. Then we've got The Island. I haven't got a proof yet, but I've got a printout. Don't know if you can see that because I can't see. Can you see that?
I can. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So The Island is my young adult thriller.
Love the cover. Brilliant cover.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's so eye-catching. That comes out in January. So it's about 6 teenagers who find themselves marooned on a Thai island and all their worst phobias come true. But it's also about mental health, teenage mental health and grief and mental illness and stuff like that, which was a lot of fun to write. And then in April, Her Last Holiday comes out, and that's about a woman called Fran, who is one of my favourite characters I've ever written. She doesn't do hugs. She is quite socially awkward, but she's got her heart in the right place. And her sister went missing on a wellness retreat in Gozo 2 years earlier, and suspected that she committed suicide. And the man who was behind this wellness retreat went to prison for 2 other deaths. And when he comes out, Fran signs up for one of his retreats in Wales to try and find out what happened to his sister. So that's the premise of that. I can say that now because Phoebe's written the blurb. and then yes, and now I need to start really plotting and thinking about the idea for the book that will come out in 2022. Yeah.
Goodness, yeah, it's all so far ahead, isn't it?
I know, it's madness. How about you? What are you working on, and what's coming out for you?
At the moment, like we were saying about it all being so far ahead, at the moment I'm in the middle of writing books 6 and 7, which just sounds crazily far in the future, considering book 2 has only just come out. But it all just works so far in advance, really. And it's mostly because I don't really think I can say too much about all this, because you know how all these different things work, where like some things are announced, so to speak, and then you can show the cover and the title and that kind of thing. So I'm going to say this without saying the title or too much about the books.
Okay.
So I'll tread very carefully. But I've got more than one book coming out next year, which has kind of shortened the amount of time to get ready, really, for it. And my next one will be a return to slightly more domestic noir territory. If Hold Your Breath was like the one that was slightly creepy and horror-y, this one is more murder mystery. And I hadn't done a proper murder before. And both A Version of the Truth and Hold Your Breath have dark things happening in them, and sometimes there's deaths where you're like, is it a murder, is it not, and that kind of thing. But I wanted to do a book that was an actual murder and have a mystery element to the core of it. And I wanted to return to London with it because up until last week I lived in London. I've now moved to Essex, but I wrote it whilst living in London, and London City I loved, and I just wanted a book that was just so seeped in the streets of London. And that was probably one of the most fun books I've written, actually, and I'll be the first of my new ones that come out next year. And it's interesting we're talking about the narratives, but it's the first book I've written from the perspective of a man.
Okay.
When all the other books have been female first-person narrators, and this one is from the 36-year-old man, dual narrative with a woman as well. So it's between two. And I won't give too much of the plot away, but it's about someone who confesses to a murder that they absolutely haven't committed. And it's the main kind of question of it is that why would someone happily confess to a crime and be very eager to confess to a crime of someone that they know and that they're part of their lives, and they just didn't do it. And so that was the kind of question that was in my head when I started writing it, and it was quite fun. That was the first time I think I've kind of assembled a plot around a hook, if that makes sense.
It's a
Because
good
it was that,
premise.
yeah, it was, yeah, thank you. It was the question that interests me, and I found myself like excited to start writing it, and that's how I kind of built the plot around it. But it's weird because that one's now very much done, and I think the proofs, will be coming out later this year, or the advanced copy's coming out later this year, and that very much that book feels like my year last year when it's going to be 2021. And so yeah, the two I'm writing now at the moment, one of them is a very gothic old manor house sort of book, which is likely going to be my sixth book, and that has a lot of things like Daphne du Maurier,
Oh,
The
no.
Secret Garden, that kind of very old kind of gothic fiction, and because I love that kind of stuff. That's my favorite sort of
Yeah.
if I'm reading classic novels, they're particularly that, of that kind of thing. And the one I'm writing kind of concurrently with that is more of a mystery missing persons novel, set in the 1980s. So there's a few different things really happening in development, but I quite like the fact they're all a bit different, but they're all still
Yeah.
working within the thriller genre.
Yeah. You're so prolific. I don't know how you've written so many books in such a short time.
I know, but my main fear is one day it will stop. Is that one day
Yeah.
the ideas will stop? We'll probably have the same thing, but at the moment, I'm in a lucky position where there isn't enough time to do all the ideas.
Mhm.
But my fear is that one day there'll be no ideas and too much time. So I'm just pleased it's the other way around at the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, we're getting on. It's 8:25. We've been talking for nearly an hour. It's flown by. Yeah, and we've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to turn on questions in the comments, so people, when they're watching, they can turn on commenting. So those watching can now type in their questions themselves and ask us anything. And we had some earlier on the Waterstones Instagram stories, which I'm just going to get up now. Someone called Charcuterie Man, I think I've said that right, has said, what is it that we feel sets us apart from the books that have inspired our works? What would you say that sets your books apart? It's a difficult question, that is.
Yeah. Well, I think every author has their own voice and their own past and experience and view on the world. And that's what makes each book, individual to the author. When you read a book by a certain author, even though they may explore different topics, it is that author. There's the essence of the author in that book. And I may be inspired by Margaret Atwood, for example, but I'm never going to write a Margaret Atwood book. I haven't had the same life experience as Margaret Atwood. I'm not as clever as Margaret Atwood, but I think you can still take what inspires you, and not. I don't think you try and make it your own or you try and replicate it. It just becomes part of your character. It becomes part of your inspiration. And actually, I deliberately don't read Margaret Atwood books when I'm writing because she's got such a strong voice that it gets in my head and it changes the way that I write. So any author who has a very strong voice, I will not read. I couldn't read Kate Atkinson either. But yeah, that's my answer. I think that's a bit of a messy answer, but that's my attempt at that answer.
No, I completely agree. I think the same, and it's interesting. I was having a conversation with my agent about this week with the books I'm planning, and I'm always worried, thinking, has that been done before, or is that something else that's been done? And I think it's interesting, important probably, to remember that each story, even though many stories have been done many different times, it is a different story because it's you telling it. As you say, it's
Yeah.
your story because you put your own experiences and your own thoughts and your own imaginations creating it. And I think that's an important thing to bear in mind, I think. So I suppose in answer to the question, the things that sets you apart is that you're coming from every story from your own different angle, I think.
Yeah.
Really. The other question we had was do you only read thrillers, or do you read books from other genres? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I absolutely read widely. I do get sent a huge amount of proofs in psychological thrillers and crime. So for me to kind of take a little break from that, because it can sometimes feel like work, being sent proofs to read. Um, I do love to read quite widely. I mean, my first love really as a teenager was sort of dystopian sci-fi type novels. Loved George Orwell, Aldous Huxley, Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury, and obviously Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. And I still love books like that. I love end of the world type books. But I also love YA, and Meg Rossoff is my favourite. Yeah, you've got it too. Yeah, so good. Meg Rossoff is my favourite young adult author. Um, but yes, at the moment I'm kind of reading. I'm kind of reading lots of proofs, but I've also got here the autobiography by Skin, signed, bought from Waterstones. The lead singer of Skunk Anansie. I love to read non-fiction as well. Particularly to do with psychology and neurological conditions. I've got a degree in psychology, so anything to do with the brain or the brain going wrong fascinates me. I'm just looking around my office. I bought a load of John Boyne, which I haven't read yet, but I've heard such good things. I want to read that. So yeah, I like a bit of literary fiction, bit of literary commercial crossover, a bit of dystopian, YA. There's not much that I won't try, to be honest. But I do, and I've got Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet waiting for me to read that as well. She's one of my absolute favourite authors. So yeah, I read widely, and I will read the books that everybody's talking about, because like we said earlier, I'm curious as to why they're the books that everybody's talking about.
Yeah.
How about you?
I'm very much the same. I'm probably actually an awful, terrible part of the writing community, in the sense that I really don't like proofs, because I can't stand the way they're not bound in the same way as actual books. That sounds like a terrible thing to say, but I can't bear it that it's like, you know, a lot looser or that kind of thing, which is just awful. And I do sometimes read proofs, but nearly always it will remain on my shelf. Then I'll go out and buy the actual book.
Yeah.
Because the actual book just feels, you know, a lot nicer. And also, I never read digitally either. So any books where they say, "Can we give you digital proof?" I feel so bad saying I won't read it, because I don't own anything to read it on. So it's always the actual book and the finished copy that is the big thing for me. And but in answer to the question, I do read a lot of books that aren't crime. Simply because there are so many different books that interest me when I read about them. And working in the book industry as well, I hear about a lot of the new releases before they come out, and quite often I'll have little lists of ones that to keep an eye on that I know I'll find interesting. At the moment, I've been reading Andrew Hagen's latest novel, Mayflies, which is a really interesting one. He wrote a shortlisted book called The Illuminations about 5 years ago, which was quite big. And this one's really good. It's a very interesting book about male friendship and a group of 20-something-year-old guys who are friends together, and kind of looks at those bonds of youth and how changing from teenagehood to adulthood and that sort of thing. And which is also a theme of the one that we both mentioned, really, the Meg Rossoff, The Great Garden. Although that is a bit of an anomaly for me. I very rarely read so-called like children's or YA fiction, but I think this is a particular book, with the exception of your YA books, of course. Which I love the treatment. So I do read YA on occasion, but I think this really could be read by anyone. I think it's a brilliant book, whatever genres you're into. I think this, and the third one I wanted to mention actually was one that was on the Booker long list, called Who They Was, which is a really, really visceral gang life and gang culture within London, and it's a really voicey book. If any book to maybe avoid when you're writing, because you don't want to get the voice in your head, but it's and I listened to some of that on audio, and it's brilliantly performed by the author in very much the voice of the character. So yeah, I do read a lot that are outside the thriller genre, simply because I find there's so much overlap and there's so many different stories and themes and different, fictional situations that could go in any book, regardless of genre, really. So I'd feel I was missing out if I stuck just to thrillers. I'm just going to have a look at the questions that we've got coming in from people. Someone has said, there we go. Oh, Libby has said, there are so many crime documentaries now on Netflix, etc. Do either of you watch true crime? Do you watch true crime?
Yes, but I don't binge it. I find, weirdly, because I write about dark things and missing children and dead bodies and all this kind of thing, I find true crime can get under my skin a little bit sometimes, because it's real, and because that the victims were real, and the relatives left behind, the grief that they must feel. So I can only really watch ones that are really quite old. There's almost something about, if there was a murder case in the 60s or the 70s, those grainy photos make it feel a bit less sort of, make me feel a bit less hurt or emotional. I don't really know. I do watch them, but some of them are so hard hitting that I can't watch any that are to do with children, anything bad happening to children or children being killed. I absolutely can't watch that. But then again, I'll watch some to try and understand. I mean, it's not a true crime documentary, but I watched Honor last night, about an honor killing that was based on a real story in 2006, 2007. And that was almost to try and understand the culture of killing somebody rather than your family being in disgrace, But yeah, I watched some. Some I find really interesting, others are just too much for me. How about you?
I don't really watch any at all, like factual ones. It's terrible, but I never watch really any factual TV unless it involves David Attenborough and Sweet Animals. But because the darker side of life I reserve usually for fiction, although that does of course incorporate fictional dramatizations of real life cases, of which there seems to be a huge appetite of. And you mentioned Honor, and last week or the week before there was Des with David Tennant in, about the Dennis Nielsen killings and things like that. So the appetite for true crime seems to have gravitated over to fiction as well. And particularly Fun ITV seems to have found their niche in adapting these really disturbing real true crime situations or cases. And there was, I think, White House Farmers earlier this year as well, which I found absolutely.
Oh yes, I watched that one.
Yeah. And I think a lot of these have taken their prompt from the podcasts and the Netflix series and that kind of stuff, but have put it into scripted fiction. So I watch those, but to my shame I watch very little other TV other than drama, I have to say. Let's see what other sorry, what did you say?
I said a lot of Poirot and Miss Marple.
A lot of Poirot, yes. Yeah, my Poirot is I watch a different Poirot every week, and I do this every year from April to December. And I watch the feature-length ones that ITV made between 1989 and 2013, and chronologically as ITV broadcast them. And I time it so the very last one is the week of Christmas. And I mentioned I love Christmas earlier, and my favourite thing is watching the Agatha Christie adaptations from April, knowing that I'm starting on the path that will lead to Christmas. Really, so I have my own kind of crime-themed traditions.
Your whole Instagram feed is it autumn yet? Is it Christmas yet? It's very sweet.
Right. Okay, I think we should just take just one or two more. Okay. Magic Money Magnet has said, as a new writer, any tips to build confidence? What are your tips to build confidence?
Oh, confidence is so hard, and so many authors struggle with confidence. I mean, I really found my confidence as a writer by writing short stories, writing flash fiction. and sending them off to places. I mean, I don't know how it is now, but when I was writing back in what sort of 2006, 2007, there were a lot of online e-zines, and a lot of them didn't pay, but you'd have to go through a submission process in order to see your work published on their website. And that gave me confidence when people would say, yeah, we love that flash fiction that you've written, or we love that short story. And I entered competitions as well. I entered short story competitions, and if I got placed or highly commended, or even if I won it, it would start to give me that confidence in myself, because there was somebody sort of external from my friends and family who was telling me that I had written a good thing. If you don't do that, if you're just writing a novel, and you're sending it out to agents and you're getting rejection, that's very hard to regain your confidence or find your confidence. But as Barnaby said earlier, joining some kind of group where people can give you feedback and compliment you on the things that you do well will give you confidence. And the one other thing that I did do before I got started as a published author, if I read a book that was really badly written, I'd feel a lot better about my books and what I'd written. So, you know, read stuff that you think is not very good, but don't read the really, really good stuff and compare yours to them. Because one thing I say to every writer is, your first draft, don't compare it to a published book, because as we've already discussed loads this evening, they go through structural edits and line edits and copy edits and proofs and all of these things designed to polish a book and make a book perfect. So don't compare what you have just written to a published book, because that will make you feel bad. And don't compare yourself to somebody who has such a different style to you, that you can, you know, I will never be a really erudite writer with loads of metaphors and similes that are just beautifully crafted. I'm all about pace and plot and character and moving things along quite quickly while building atmosphere, but I'm not a wordy writer. So don't compare yourselves to people that you think are perfect. That's about as good as I've got on that one. Barnaby, have you got any advice?
I think the best thing to do to build confidence is to stop seeing books and authors as these otherworldly objects, I think, or seeing authors as celebrities, which can be hard when you've now got celebrities who then become authors, of course. But it's so then it all kind of merges. But essentially, authors are not celebrities. Most authors would never get recognised on the street. Most authors will never be rich. Most authors will probably not see their book in many shops, and you know, it won't be the big thing that quite often people presume it is. And whilst of course there are those that are very lucky to be in the positions that we are now, but I think to try and bring down the idea that they're these kind of mythical beings, for me, was an important step, that they are just humans who want to write books because that's what they enjoy. And I think the big thing to do to get into that place is to read the acknowledgements in the backs of recently published fiction, not books that have already become modern classics and that kind of thing, or authors even who have a lot of acclaim and experience, just new, like particularly like debut novels and things like that, because the acknowledgements will nearly always be filled with so much gratitude for the people who have been involved, and the author will be very honest quite often about how hard the journey was or how pleased they are to be in that place. And it really brings it down to planet Earth when you read all those acknowledgements about all the people that have, you know, helped them along, or when they recommend things like creative writing courses and that kind of stuff. It allows you to see that book and that author as a very personal project to them. And then once I think you get to that, it's not too far away from finding your own personal project and your own kind of, you know, way to doing it. So I think that's probably the biggest step, or at least was for me. I don't know how helpful an answer that is really.
And I think most authors don't feel confident. If I'm honest, we all have imposter syndrome. We all wish we could write like XYZ. We're all aware of the flaws in our books, and desperately hope that nobody points them out in a review. when we're not, you know, I know what my strong points are and what my weaknesses are in the books that I write. And you won't, you know, if you ever meet a writer who says, I have written the most brilliant book, then it's probably terrible, because most are very self-depreciating. And so you're probably a perfectly good writer, because we all feel like that.
Okay, we should probably do one question as quick as we can, and then we'll go. And this one's kind of linked, actually, about if you've got an idea, where should you start?
That's a massive question.
I know. Has everyone got another hour to like?
That's huge. So I'll make it quite concise. Barnaby said about going on a favour course, which is great, and actually loads of authors have come from that course. But I didn't go on any courses, but I'm a big fan of a creative writing book. I've got lots of books on, you know, how to write a blockbuster, how to craft character, how to do pace. The Stealing Hollywood is my favourite one, which is by Alexandra Sokoloff, which teaches you to use the 4-act structure, which is used in films, but to use it in books. I would have a look at all of the creative writing books that you find in Waterstones, and just flick through, see which one calls out to you, because some of them won't work for you. I've read a few and I thought that one's not so good, but the one that sort of you think, oh yeah, I can follow this, or I understand how this book has been crafted, or whatever. If you are completely stuck, just read a book on how to write a book. That's pretty much how I started. Or take a book that you love and analyze it. So you've read it as a reader and you really enjoyed it, then read it as a writer. How did they achieve that? And then how I start. So if I start off with a premise, so for Strangers, it was 3 lonely people get caught up in a crime in a shopping centre, and then I'll say to myself, okay, who are the 3 people, and what is it that they want? You know, what do they want to achieve? What are their goals in this novel? And what are the obstacles that are going to stop them? What is their flaw that makes it harder for them to achieve their goal? Why are they the person they are now? What happened in their past? So thinking about character. And I start from there, really.
Yeah, I would echo all of that, really. And Stealing Hollywood, the book you mentioned, which I think I heard from you in an interview way back before I was published. And that was just, it's transformative. It really is, to do with how films can be a perfect tutor, in a way, to writing novels. And I would also say, listen to podcasts and author interviews, particularly with newly published authors, because so many of them talk about the places they start and that particular moment when they got the idea. And I think the more people hear other avenues, other processes, other different things, it gives, it's similar to the confidence question, it gives you confidence to start yourself. And the 2 podcasts that there's the Waterstones podcast, of course, we should mention, but there's also 2 podcasts particularly for up-and-coming writers or writers who are starting, which is The Worried Writer, hosted by Sarah Painter, which both of us have been guests on. And there's also The Honest Authors, which is hosted by Gillian McAllister and Holly Seddon, which you were a guest on recently, I remember listening to. And both of those podcasts are brilliant at bringing the process down to earth, bringing it to a manageable size, and realizing that no one really knows what they're doing. Everyone's trying to find their own, way through it. And I think, once you've put yourself in that mindset, I think developing the idea and making that difficult leap from idea to the page doesn't seem like such a huge jump. Just scales it in a little bit more. So that would probably be my bit of advice. Right, I think we've gone over our hour. We've overrun. We've been so enthusiastic about all these things, and thank you to everyone who's asked questions. It's been great. So we should say goodbye. Thank you, Callie, for joining me on this brilliant.
Thank you so much. It's gone so quickly. I can't believe
fast,
it.
Hasn't it?
Yeah,
it's flown by.
Thank you, everybody who watched. I hope it was
Yes,
useful.
and thank you everyone who asked questions as well. And this should also be, if you know people who wanted to listen to it or would find it helpful, this should be available to watch on Waterstones Instagram afterwards. Yeah, you can catch up after then. So yeah, thank you everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.